Elijah Carter had lived by the lake his entire life. He wasn't just another homeowner tucked behind neat hedges and manicured lawns, he was part of the land itself. That lake had been his sanctuary since childhood, a place where his father had taught him to fish, where his mother's laughter once carried over summer barbecues, and where he built a simple wooden bridge with his own hands, one plank at a time. For years, that bridge wasn't just a shortcut across the water. It was his history, his heart, his home. But the HOA didn't see it that way. From the moment new board members took over, Elijah became their favorite target. They didn't like that his house stood out, weathered wood instead of sterile white paint, a wraparound porch instead of their approved modern aesthetic. They sent letters, fines, demands. But nothing stung worse than the morning he walked outside and saw a crew of construction trucks rumbling toward the water. He froze. The foreman didn't even look at him when he barked the words that would ignite the kind of war no one in that neighborhood was ready for. Take it down. It was his bridge they were pointing at. At first, Elijah thought it was a mistake. He marched down the hill, boots pounding the earth, fury burning in his chest. "This is private property," he shouted, his voice cutting through the hum of machinery. "You touch that bridge, you'll regret it." The woman in charge, Meredith, the HOA president, didn't flinch. She stood there in her pristine white blazer, holding her walkie-talkie like a queen wielding a scepter. "That bridge violates code," she said, every syllable sharp enough to cut glass. "Either you take it down, or we will." Elijah's fists clenched. "Over my dead body." And that's when the engines roared to life. He watched in disbelief as they tore into the structure that had carried decades of his family's memories. Planks splintered. Nails screamed out of the wood. The sound was worse than any gunshot he'd ever heard. And through it all, Meredith just stood there, smiling like she'd won something. Neighbors gathered, whispering behind perfectly trimmed hedges. Some filmed it on their phones. None of them helped. Elijah stood there as the bridge, his bridge, collapsed into the water, reduced to nothing but floating debris. He didn't shout anymore. He didn't beg. He didn't even move. He just stared. Because in that moment, something inside him broke, and what replaced it wasn't grief. It was resolve. If you're feeling this story, hit that subscribe button. Because every time you do, it helps us tell more stories that people in power want to bury. And while you're at it, drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Now, back to Elijah's fight. The HOA thought they'd humiliated him. They didn't realize they'd just lit a fuse. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He sat on his porch staring at the lake, his jaw clenched, the crickets chirping around him like they were mocking his silence. Every memory of that bridge haunted him. He remembered his father hammering down the first board. He remembered his mother bringing sweet tea out in mason jars, laughing at how crooked it looked at first until it was finally perfect. And now it was gone. That's when Elijah made a decision that would shake the neighborhood to its core. If they wanted a war, he'd give them one. By dawn, he'd already begun his research. Property lines, water rights, old county records nobody bothered to look at anymore. The more he dug, the more he realized something terrifying for the HOA. That lake didn't belong to them. It belonged to him. Meredith had no idea. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Neighbors sat in stiff folding chairs, sipping coffee out of paper cups, expecting Elijah to come in shouting. But he didn't. He walked in calm, measured, almost smiling. When Meredith saw him, her smirk widened. "If you're here to file another complaint." Elijah raised his hand, cutting her off. "No," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to warn you." The room went quiet. "You destroyed something you didn't have the right to touch. And now," he leaned in, eyes locking on hers, "you're going to regret it." Some of the board members shifted uncomfortably, but Meredith just laughed. "Is that a threat, Mr. Carter?" "No," Elijah said, picking up a folded document from his jacket. "That's a fact." He slapped the papers down on the table. "County deeds. Water rights. Proof that not only did he own the land around his property, but the HOA had no legal claim to the dam that controlled the lake's water flow. Gasps filled the room. Meredith's smile finally faltered. "Enjoy your manicured lawns," Elijah said, turning to leave. "They won't matter much when this lake dries up." That night, Meredith called an emergency meeting. They tried to intimidate him. They sent letters from their lawyers. But Elijah had been underestimated for too long, and this time, he wasn't bluffing. And then it happened. The first sign of his revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't even visible at first. It started with a sound, the groaning creak of old metal as Elijah cranked open the dam's gates for the first time in years. Water surged. By morning, the lake was 3 feet lower. By the next day, docks hung in the air like broken teeth. Meredith showed up on his property in a tailored suit and heels, screaming at him from the edge of his porch. "Close the dam, Elijah," she shrieked. "You can't do this." Elijah just stared at her, his hands resting on the railing. "You destroyed my bridge," he said evenly. "Now I'm taking back my lake." Her face went pale. "We'll sue." He smiled. "Good luck with that." Because deep down, Meredith knew the truth. Legally, he had them trapped. And yet, she didn't realize Elijah wasn't done. This wasn't just about draining the lake. This was about making every single one of them understand what it felt like to be powerless. The water kept dropping. The HOA begged. They offered to rebuild the bridge. They promised to work something out. Elijah didn't budge. Then, one night, as the moonlight rippled across the exposed mud of what used to be their pristine waterfront, Elijah stood on his porch, watching, planning. Because his next move wouldn't just get their attention. It would make the entire neighborhood shake. And that's when he picked up the phone and made a call that would change everything. And that was just the beginning. The night after the lake drained was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the kind that settled heavy, pressing down like a storm waiting to break. Elijah sat on his porch, his chair creaking softly under his weight, staring out at what used to be the shimmering heart of the neighborhood. Now it was just cracked earth and forgotten things. Sun-bleached beer cans, a rusted lawn chair, even the skeleton of a boat someone abandoned decades ago. It should have felt like ruin. Instead, Elijah smiled. The HOA wanted to take his bridge, but he'd taken something bigger. Inside her glass kitchen at the other end of the neighborhood, Meredith Benson wasn't smiling. Her reflection glared back at her from the window, her jaw tight as she typed email after email to attorneys, county officials, anyone who might stop this nightmare before it spread. Because it wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about control. And for the first time since she'd crowned herself queen of the HOA, Meredith was losing it. By dawn, the neighborhood had turned into a battlefield. Elijah's phone rang before the sun was fully up. "Have you seen it?" a neighbor whispered. Elijah chuckled. "Seen it? I made it." By the time he finished his coffee, Meredith was marching up his driveway, her heels stabbing into the gravel, 2 board members flanking her like foot soldiers. They didn't bother with greetings. Meredith slammed a stack of papers onto his porch table so hard the coffee rippled. "An injunction," she snapped. "You're going to stop this nonsense and put the lake back where it belongs." Elijah didn't even glance at the papers. "The lake's where it belongs," he said. "Right where you can see it but can't use it." One of the board members, a wiry man with a permanent scowl, pointed a finger. "We'll bury you in legal fees." Elijah leaned forward, his voice calm but sharp as broken glass. "You've been trying to bury me for months. You might want to look around. I'm still standing." Meredith's nostrils flared. She wasn't used to this. People didn't talk back to her. They paid their fines. They tore down their fences. They folded. But Elijah? He was turning defiance into an art form. And worse, some of the neighbors were watching from their porches and smiling. 2 days later, Elijah filed a notice with the county. He was rebuilding the bridge. This time, it wasn't going to be just a walkway. It was going to be a statement. Sturdy steel beams. Reinforced wood. A bridge that would outlast every smug email Meredith had ever sent. And when the plans hit the public record, the neighborhood lit up. Meredith called an emergency HOA meeting. The board table, once her throne, felt different now. Half the seats were empty. Those who stayed didn't look her in the eye. Some of them were wondering if maybe, just maybe, Elijah wasn't the villain she'd painted him to be. Her voice wavered as she pounded her gavel. We cannot allow this man to undermine us. If we lose control of this, we lose everything. But control was already slipping through her fingers. Elijah didn't waste time. While Meredith raged in boardrooms, a construction crew arrived. Trucks backed up to his yard. Lumber hit the ground. And the sound of hammers and saws echoed across the drained basin where the lake used to be. Reporters arrived next. Elijah hadn't called them, he didn't need to. The story had taken on a life of its own. Local news vans lined the street, cameras rolling as Elijah stood in his yard, sleeves rolled up, talking about property rights and bullies in expensive clothes. Meredith tried to hide. When the cameras turned to her, she ducked into her SUV and peeled out of the driveway like a criminal caught red-handed. That night, the headlines told the story for her. The man who drained the lake and took on the HOA. Social media exploded. Residents who'd been silent now had opinions. Some called him crazy. Others called him a hero. And for every angry comment demanding he put things back, there were 10 saying, good. Someone needed to put that HOA in its place. Meredith wasn't done fighting. She filed complaints with the county. She called environmental inspectors. She even paid for an attorney who promised to bring this man to his knees. When the inspector showed up, Elijah was waiting with a folder so thick it looked like a phone book. Permits. Water quality reports. County approvals. The inspector flipped through the paperwork, whistled low, and said, "Looks like you did everything by the book." Elijah grinned. "That's the thing about rules," he said. "They work both ways." Meredith nearly choked when she got the news. As the bridge rose from the mud, so did the tide against Meredith. Neighbors who'd once been terrified of HOA fines started showing up in Elijah's yard with coffee and lawn chairs. They watched the work like it was a summer blockbuster. Even the ones who didn't like him respected him now. And Meredith? She was unraveling. At the next board meeting, she snapped. "He's turning this into a circus. Do you people understand what this means for property values?" A board member cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Meredith, people seem happier now than they've been in years." She slammed her gavel so hard it cracked. "This is my neighborhood." No one corrected her. They didn't have to. They just stared, and in that silence, Meredith finally seemed to realize it. It wasn't hers anymore. The day Elijah finished the bridge was the day everything changed. The lake bed, still mostly dry, stretched out behind him like proof of everything he'd fought for. The bridge itself gleamed under the sun, bigger and stronger than the one they destroyed. Meredith stood at the edge of his property, shaking with rage. "You think this is over?" she spat. Elijah turned, calm as ever. "For me? Yeah. For you? Not even close." And with that, he walked up onto his bridge and planted his boots on the wood like it was holy ground. The neighbors cheered. Meredith stormed off. A week later, she resigned. When the lake finally returned, because Elijah opened the dam again, it was different. This time, it wasn't just water. It was a reminder. The HOA, stripped of Meredith's iron grip, voted in new leadership. Fines were reduced. Petty rules were rolled back. And Elijah? He didn't just get his bridge. He got his neighborhood back. On the evening the water crept back beneath his bridge, Elijah stood there, hands in his pockets, the sound of the lake lapping against the beams. For the first time in months, he wasn't fighting anymore. He didn't need to, because some battles don't end in courtrooms or meetings. Some battles end when the bully finally looks around and realizes they've been outnumbered the whole time. Meredith left town 2 months later. Nobody threw her a going-away party. But Elijah? He threw a barbecue. The entire neighborhood came. Even the ones who doubted him showed up, shook his hand, and thanked him. As the sun went down, kids ran across his bridge, laughing. Adults leaned on the railing, drinks in hand, looking out over the lake. And Elijah smiled. Because that bridge wasn't just wood and steel. It was proof. Proof that sometimes you don't have to burn it all down to win. Sometimes you just drain the lake and make them watch.